would love to give a class to prospective buyers on, hey, you're going to go see a lot of houses at open houses. Here are 15 things to sort of check off in your mind about the house, and they would be simple things like.
Welcome to Let's Talk Real Estate USA. Today we are talking to Neal Wilson of Acorn Home Inspections. We're talking all things home inspections. Remember to hit the like and subscribe button for more weekly content. Let's get going. Welcome, everyone, to Let's Talk Real Estate USA. Today, we are talking to Neal Wilson of Acorn Inspections, and we are talking all things inspections. How's it going, Neal?
It's great, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Okay, wonderful. So, Neal, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this business?
I had a long career in advertising and marketing communications, and so I understand how to communicate with people. And I've also been a homeowner for a long time. And the last time I sold a house and bought a house, I had two experiences with home inspectors that were not exactly what I would like as a customer. In the experience of selling a house, the home inspector turned everything into a 5-alarm fire. Every little defect he found was an enormous problem. And that created unnecessary friction in the transaction and very close to killing the deal. So I knew, I just knew that wasn't the right way to be a home inspector. And then when I bought this house, we told the inspector at the front that we were going to do a gut rehab on the house and that I was most concerned with roof and foundation because everything else was going to be new. And the very first thing he did was inspect the appliances, which were going out to the garbage. So, I reminded him of what we were interested in. And he wound up missing a pretty significant defect on the roof that wound up costing me a lot of money later. And I also didn't really like the stand-up comedy routine during the inspection. It seemed like the jokes were very old, and I knew I didn't want to be an inspector like that. I decided to become an inspector after doing a lot of research and talking to a lot of home inspectors, and finding that they were very different than me in terms of what was important to them. Personally, I think I gravitate towards old houses. I think old houses have a fantastic story to tell, and I like bringing them back to a healthy condition while modernizing things that make people more comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I think most of my customers, especially the first-time buyers, are in the same boat. So I decided to become a home inspector. I went through the training and the internship and passed the exam and got the radon license and that sort of thing. And I think my approach was different than a lot of other home inspectors, and I found a customer base that was interested in having an inspection with the perspective of there's no such thing as a bad house. There's deferred maintenance and there's issues to be corrected, but let's go into this with an open mind and see if this is the right house for you.
So ironically, when I was teaching voice, I used to say this: there is no such thing as a bad sound. It's just the wrong sound for the time.
Yeah, horses for courses.
Yeah. So I have an interesting question, because you're my go-to inspector. I've used other inspectors because my clients have chosen other people and things like that. But what interests me most about you is that, number one, your granular knowledge is just vast on things that I'm just like, how do you know the history of like tubing? The idea of the reason I tend to go with you is that many inspectors will do this. They will introduce themselves, then they'll start going around and they'll point out defects and tell you if it's important or not, and then move on. Whereas you give this like
I call it a
holistic.
preamble.
What?
Yeah, I call it a preamble before I start the inspection. I think I think the thing that I realized is when people show up at a home inspection, especially if they're first-time buyers, they're kind of frazzled in terms of everything they've been through to get to inspection day. And they have all sorts of other things going on in their minds with respect to, will it appraise? And the bank just called and they need another document. And so there's this level of tension and anxiety. And so I start out by saying the following. We're here to do a visual and non-invasive inspection of a house. When we're looking at a house, we're typically identifying three kinds of defects: primary defects that were there when the house was built, secondary defects that were created when the house was remodeled, and the third kind of defect is deferred maintenance, by far the most common, or maintenance that was done with an eye on saving money rather than doing it the right way. And then I talk about the colored flag system I use in my reports. I only use red for danger, things that could actually kill you. Yellow is a warning. It should be somewhere on their list of things to correct. And blue, upgrade to make the house even more comfortable than it is, or safe than it is today. The preamble serves a couple of purposes, I think. It level sets expectations about what we're going to do and the order of events. And it also gives them a chance for their ears to get used to listening to some helpful advice. Because for the first few minutes they're there, they've got all that other stuff in their minds about buying this house. And then they sort of relax and realize that, okay, I'm perhaps the only person with no vested interest in whether they buy this place or not. And I'm really only interested in helping them understand the house's story. And by the end of the preamble, I think their blood pressure's gone down a little bit and their heart rate's gone down a little bit. And that's when we can really start talking about how to live successfully in the house and what things they will need to be concerned about as they consider the purchase.
What do you say to clients who are just like, I don't really need an inspection, especially during the COVID times when it was like people were just not doing inspections? Why would you say that's not a good idea unless you plan on just knocking it to the ground?
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of flips over the last 4 years where people opted not to do an inspection. And I usually get the call a year after they've been living in the house and said, hey, we didn't do an inspection when we bought this, but we think we have some issues. Can you come take a look? And invariably, there were easy to spot defects that affected that materially affected the value, the safety, the utility of the home. Mm-hmm. That if they had had any kind of home inspector, they would have known about this before going into it. And it's never fun to tell people, yeah, you bought something that has a lot of inherent problems, and yeah, you really should have had a home inspection. Mm-hmm. I think they're incredibly important because there are some builders that just don't know the right way to address a defect. There are some builders, unfortunately, that look for an opportunity to conceal a defect rather than correcting it. And you know, frequently sellers aren't really aware of what they're really selling. You know, I inspected a house yesterday in the disclosure, it said it had a septic system. And everybody was very, very concerned about, the health of this septic system. And I walked down into the basement and I scratched my head because I don't see any evidence of a septic system here. And later that afternoon, they had a septic specialist come out, and he agreed with me. He said, "There's no septic system here. It's just a town sewer." So there are either because of a faulty memory or because they didn't really understand the mechanics of their house. There's all sorts of things that show up in disclosures or are said as fact to buyers, which in fact aren't true at all. Like, we have a septic system. No, you don't. And so I think that getting a home inspection is a very small investment that really protects you.
Yeah. Neal, I always ask everyone this question. What is a question you wish I had asked, and how would you have answered it?
Yeah. I think that if more homeowners understood that, home buyers understood that they can sort of do their own little pre-inspection before they even bid on a place. Because once you decide to bid on a place, you've just signed yourself up for time and expense associated with doing your due diligence. And there are a lot of homes I've inspected where as soon as I walked in, I discovered major, significant, high-impact defects that if they had, and they would have been visible to anybody that had just a little bit of experience. And so, I would love to give a class to prospective buyers on, hey, you're going to go see a lot of houses at open houses. Here are 15 things to sort of check off in your mind about the house, and they would be simple things like stand across the street from the house and just use your gut instinct. Is the house sitting straight? It's amazing how many times I go up to a house and say, hey, let's go across the street together, and say, what do you think? Is that house sitting straight? And it's, no, there's a lean to it, and that's the first time the buyers have noticed it. Or, it's very simple to look at a boiler or a furnace or a water heater or an air conditioning compressor and take 30 seconds and look at the serial number and then type into Google the name of the brand, like Carrier, HVAC, age. And you're going to wind up being taken to a page. You probably, at the top of the results, it'll probably be Building Intelligence, which is a free site where they tell you, here is the manufacturer's rubric or template for serial numbers. And those serial numbers will instantly tell you whether the furnace or other appliance is 1 year old, 10 years, 20, 30 years old. It takes 30 seconds of research, and you would have a good understanding of the age of your appliances. And then you can think about how long should appliances last. Typically a water heater in our area is a 10 to 12 year lifespan. Typically in our area, a furnace has a 20-year lifespan, or a boiler a 20-year lifespan. You can look at the air conditioning compressor and very quickly determine whether it's R410A refrigerant, which is the new modern refrigerant, or is it the discontinued R22? It's all the information is right there on the data plate. You can buy a $5 receptacle tester. Now I have a much more complex receptacle tester, but even the $5 ones at Home Depot, plug it into a couple of outlets and make sure that you're dealing with grounded circuits. As you're walking around a house looking at it possibly to buy, why don't you open and close a few windows? Because you'll discover broken sash springs or locks that don't line up. So I think that there's really kind of a short list of these things that I would love to make available to people that would allow them to, before they call a home inspector, it would allow them to know whether or not they've got aged out appliances, whether the roof is quite obviously past its life expectancy with chips and missing shingles and shingles out of place. There are some just sort of basic things that everybody can do to make sure that the investment of time and money into bidding on a property makes sense for them.
So my last question then is, how does someone contact you?
Oh, sure. I'm easy to find. You can either search for Acorn Home Inspections in Bloomfield. You can call me, 973-598-5827. You can find me at Instagram at Acorn Home Inspections LLC. And my email address is acornneal, Neal, @gmail.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for coming on today and talking all things inspections.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you. So let